Hey, what's going on, good people? This is Gardner Douglas, and I am your Oyster Ninja. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. It's been a little bit since the last time I got on here, and I think I need to apologize for the listeners. But I also had to apologize to my family, because if it's one thing I learned about this podcast is it is time consuming. Or it can be time consuming. I think I'm learning now and getting a little better at it. So, I think I'm going to make this a bi-weekly podcast. And if something falls in on the off week, it happens. But I think I can stick to the bi-weekly consistency. So that's the plan. That's my apology. Hope you accept it. Hope you keep listening. And the good news is we got some good shows ahead. But this episode, let me tell you, groundbreaking, astronomical, I don't know, a whole lot of big words, but it's a great show. So this week I'm talking to Miss Isabella Macbeth Cain. Hands down one of the best shuckers out there. Right now, ranked in the top 3. I think she's number 2. She's going to tell you all about her and her shucking career, in this podcast. I met Gator 2 years ago down at the Nationals, National Oyster Competition. And she was good competition. When I think of oyster ambassadors, Gator comes to mind, and that's why, I had to get her on here so she could tell you her story. And, her story cannot be left out, seriously. She really defines what an oyster shucker should be, and it's breaking down more than one barrier in the process of climbing and taking the title of the nation's top shucker. So, I hope you guys enjoy and get something out of this episode. It's groundbreaking.
So my name's Isabella Macbeth, the Holy City Oyster Maven here in Charleston, South Carolina. In the shucking world, people know me as Gator. It's the nickname I picked up in the Army. It just kind of stuck with me. And I've been shucking since I started shucking when I was about 5 years old, but got into it professionally after college in my early 20s, and I'm now currently the number 2 shucker in the United States.
How did you say you got the name Gator?
My days in the Army, I was always seen as kind of a laid-back, chill guy, and then when something needed to happen, I would snap to action, and they thought it was like a gator snapping out of the water, kind of unseen, no signs. So being from the low country, it kind of just ended up sticking with me.
Get the heck out of here. I didn't even know you was in the Army. I'm in the Army.
Yeah, 11 Bravo.
Said, what's the Oyster Maven?
The Holy City Oyster Maven is the kind of brand I'm building for myself here in the city, doing kind of corporate events, oyster education, pairings, teaching people to shuck, and working with other restaurants to help bring their level of service as well up to this higher standard across the board. Maven, it would be a Yiddish word for guru. I just didn't want to use guru because that was a little bit overused.
So could you go into a little detail of your history? You was telling me a little bit about where you're from and your family's history.
Yeah, absolutely. So my family came to Charleston, South Carolina back in the colonial period in 1672. They're from Vitra, which is in Brittany in France. And a little later on, the next big migration of my family were Scots that came in 1740 from Aberdeenshire. They had lost at the Battle of Culloden, rebelling against the German houses in support of Stuart. So pretty much my earliest ancestors here were 1600s, and my latest ancestors to arrive were still predating the American Revolution. But I grew up in Charleston, learned to sail at a young age, ballroom dance, growing up in the family rice plantation, learning to hunt and all. Ultimately, I got into oysters because oyster roasts were just such a big social gathering. People, families come around a bunch of oysters and eat them and socialize and celebrate special events. And I ultimately just fell in love with them. And my mom would send me oysters to boarding school or to college, wherever I happened to be in the world. And right up after college in '09, I couldn't find a job. So my uncle opened a raw bar, not specifically for me, but he happened to be opening one at the time. Called me in his office and said, "Hey, here's the layout plans. I'm going to do this big thing. Big raw bar is going to be your main feature, like place Hog Island out in San Francisco. And, you're great at talking to people. You know a lot about the history here. Why don't you get up there and shuck some oysters like you know how to do?" And I was shocked in my first 2 weeks at how hard working a raw bar and shucking raw oysters for people could actually be. Really, really wore me out. Took some time to get used to that. So that's just a little bit about my history, my family, and, how I kind of got into shucking oysters.
And who did you say taught you how to shuck oysters?
Oh, yes. My mother, when I was about 5, I wandered up to an oyster to a table at an oyster roast. Barely even reach up there, and I started grabbing the oysters that were already kind of steamed partially open and trying to pull them apart with my hands. And my mother, she got worried I was going to hurt myself like any mother would, and she stopped me and said, "If you want to do this, you have to do it right." Gave me gloves and a knife and tried to teach me how to pop them open, and I was very cavalier about it and just wouldn't listen to my mom's stubbornness. And the gentleman across the table, Mr. Gator, he lost one of his fingers in a wood shop accident. He liked to work on furniture. And he leaned over and showed me his hand with a little bit of his finger missing. He said, "I lost my finger doing exactly what you're doing right there. You better listen to your mother." And I still kind of never did, but that always stuck with me. So it was my mom when I was about 5, and we always go to oyster roast, go back and forth. I'd say she's as good as I am.
Hey, Gator, so was your mom a master shucker?
No, she wasn't. She studied accounting in college, ultimately opened up her own small business. Later, got rid of that and went to real estate, but last year at a family oyster roast, she was right there teaching my nieces and nephews how to properly shuck, even though I was sitting there ranked shucker in the world. She's still getting in there and mixing up with the best, taking charge and correcting me when I still mess up. So she is talented with the knife, but no, she's never competed in any way.
Mom Duke said, "I'm just gonna let you know, hey, I taught you this."
Yes, she still lets me know that, and I admit it freely for sure. I thank Mom a lot for that ability.
So, what did you study in school?
I started at the Citadel, where I studied history and education. After I left the Army, I quit the Citadel before graduation. Just couldn't stand being in a military college when I wasn't going into the service any further. And I moved to Europe, and I finished at Hotel School The Hague in Holland, where I studied international hospitality management, a minor in culinary arts. So I had wine classes, I had cooking classes, I had business hotel accounting. It's kind of essentially culinary school mixed with business school.
That sounds real fancy.
And it was a lot of fun, I'll tell you that much. I had classes on drinking, where we actually threw back a few beverages during class, and that was something I don't think I would have had to experience in the U.S., so it was a lot of fun.
Right. So where are you working at these days?
Today I am currently working at Rappahannock Oyster Bar in Charleston, South Carolina, in the old cigar factory. I am the lead shucker and raw bar manager there. So my responsibilities fall under ordering all the oysters for the week, along with the other shellfish, mussels and clams, bucket of oysters for the po' boys, and training our staff and just maintaining high standards and and looking into possible new fun pairings with mignonettes and other things that we can bring our guests to the raw bar.
Cool, cool. So what are the challenges of, running a raw bar?
There's just the normal challenge of ordering, but we're dealing with a live animal, and we don't want to over order and have them sitting in the cooler too long, and then we don't want to under order. So it's always a little bit of a challenge, kind of playing that line to see, what our business flow is going to be. But I feel like you'd have that with any industry, especially in the food industry. I think the unique challenge I face here in Charleston is finding shuckers. There aren't a lot of shuckers around. There's a lot of raw bars opening up every day and are here, and we're all fighting for talented individuals. So we end up just finding someone that says, you know what, I'm going to give that a try. I'm willing to try that, and trying to train them up properly on how to shuck an oyster. I'm always like, they sit there next to me and they'll see me shuck 5 or 6 oysters to their one. I'm like, I've been doing this for years. Slow down, concentrate on the oyster, make sure you're shucking it perfectly each time. I'll carry, the extra weight of this, because once you get that first one down, it's slow as smooth as fast. They'll start building up speed. And I was really proud to hear last week a guy I've been working with for 5 months. He said, "Hey, Bella, I found this little entrance here, this little side shuck on the oyster. These oysters are going right here." And it clicked in my mind that he was no longer an oyster opener, that he was a shucker. He started viewing these oysters as animals, talking about them that way. Started looking at different ways to deal with each one, using different knives, different approaches, because they're all unique and they're all special. So we can't just treat them all the same. So that's always, I think, the biggest struggle, but also at the same time the most rewarding part about being a lead shucker or raw bar manager.
That's a good feeling when they finally connect and like, you know what, I think I know what I'm doing a little bit here now.
Yeah, we've all had those eye-opening moments, and it's really fun when you're working with someone to see that light bulb go off, and watch them get it. I couldn't be proud of everyone I've had work underneath me that's gotten to that level.
I know that you said that, it's hard to find good shuckers or shuckers, period. What's the oyster scene like in South Carolina?
Yeah, so our oyster scene here in South Carolina is very, very unique. I think the world right now at historic levels is at 8% of what the oysters were. So we've lost almost 90% of the world's native oysters. A lot of that could be done due to, like, in New York Harbor and Chesapeake Bay, over-harvesting, not thinking forward, just thinking this year, how much can we get out, pollution, industrialism. But South Carolina never really had the culture of harvesting oysters to sell abroad or to bucket, for soups or anything. We've always had this, 5-month oyster season, with the R months, as people remember. And we harvest really just for our own personal use and oyster roast. I didn't really see it in restaurants, and it's very agricultural, coastal region here, so there's not a lot of big development on the water. And what we've been able to have is one of the last remaining wild native oyster populations that are kind of spread out. And these things we're harvesting raw oysters is 90% of our yearly harvest. But they continually have spat float along, and they attach to these oyster banks. And so the oysters continually are trying to outgrow the others so that they can open up and filter more minerals and algae and stuff that the oysters will eat off of. So they get these long, slender blades. You can think of a wild forest growing up and trees trying to outgrow another tree so that they can get the sunlight and the nutrition. So these blades, they're intertidal, which means that they're going to spend a portion of their day underwater, and then when the tide goes out, they're going to come up above, and they're going to be trying to hold the shell closed tight because they're above the water now, and the shells are going to get hardened by the sun, and they just make this really unique oyster. But then again, it's not like other regions where shucking was seen as an industry, so I don't think that's really crossed a lot of people's minds. until recently, as more and more people start coming here for tourism and moving here, and we're consuming more and more of these oysters. We're harvesting 1,000 bushels of oysters, let's say, a year, and we're only putting back about 30,000. So we're definitely working a deficit right now, and it would be crucial for our restaurants to put the shells back for things like the Wellfleet Stat and the Chesapeake Oyster Recovery Program to kind of take up kind of an initiative here with DNR and really make sure that we retain this special South Carolina oyster legacy that's very unique in the country.
How long have the farm-raised oysters been, like, I guess, popular?
Yeah, I
like
would say South Carolina started seeing the farm-raised stuff. I think Frank Roberts, the Ladies Island Oyster, I believe he was one of the ones to lead the charge. Clamor Dave of Capers Island, he does some farm raising. That all kind of started about 8 years ago, 10 at the most. We're now today seeing more and more farms popping up where there have been news articles about it and people are arguing whether it's good for ecosystem or not and the economy. And I'm going to be honest, like these are Virginia species. An adult to me is about 3 years old. It was built to 50 gallons of water a day. You can't tell me a guy out there farming 1 million oysters, even though it might hurt your view of the landscape a little bit and his bag system, however he's doing it, that 1 million oysters filtering 50 gallons of water a day per oyster is bad in any way. I see it as a great way to take the stress off our wild oysters. We can use those as more of a nice treat and move probably about 80% of our state consumption to these wonderful farm-raised oysters that are coming directly from the stat of the wild oysters. So they are just as in a decade just the descendants of the South Carolina oyster. So you're still getting that exact oyster, same flavor profiles, just a deeper cup, sometimes a little heavier milk, meat, I mean. And yeah, I just think it's a wonderful thing, but it's been about 10 years and it's definitely starting to take ground now.
That's great. So you really have experience with the wild oysters and farm-raised oysters. So what's your favorite style of shucking?
Growing up here in South Carolina, we're hen shuckers, and I didn't know there was any other kind of shucking out there until I went up to Maryland 2 years ago for the National Shucking Championship. And I got up there and people asked me if how I shucked, and I told them I shucked through the back for the hens, and they jokingly called me a butt shucker. But I started to get the idea that in the Chesapeake, a lot of people go through the bill, the front, they're scabbards. And I saw what they're doing. I'd seen these Chesapeake oysters, and they're a little bit more brittle than our hard wild oysters. And I was like, hey, show me this. How do you do this? And a couple of guys up there showed me what was being done. I bought a knife while up there and started ordering oysters from Sweet Jesus, Hollywood Oyster Company, to the Royal Bar I was managing at the time and practicing going through the bill. And so I perfected that, and that's really helped me out a lot working with Rappahannock because they're right out of Virginia, the Chesapeake Bay, and their oysters are very, very similar. Most of them need to be gone, shucked through the bill. But yeah, I'm a hen shucker. That's where I always fall back to, and but I don't limit myself, and I try to learn every aspect of every oyster and different nods, so I can actually be a master shucker, and not just be kind of a one trick wonder.
So you would say, in order for you to be a master shucker, you got to conquer 7, or would you consider yourself already a master shucker?
I've been called a master shucker. I don't think I am there yet. There's a lot of knowledge and a lot of abilities that I think, like a true master, if you look at a master sommelier or a master chef has, that I don't have. I am very skilled. I would say I'm about medium, like a mid-level shucker. But I'm constantly trying to learn new techniques. I learn more about oysters. It's a constant daily education. So hopefully where I will be able to comfortably call myself a master shucker one day.
In trying to be the master shucker, what's the most interesting thing you've learned about oysters?
Uh, for me, it's the Miroir. I had wine studies in college at hotel school, and when I first started working in that raw bar at my uncle's place on Main Street downtown, I was opening oysters from all over the world, the West Coast, the Northeast, Chesapeake Bay, sometimes Europe, and I was shocked that they were so different than what the oysters were here that I knew growing up. And I started trying to figure this out. And it was one day I was sitting there tasting them and noticing the different flavor profiles, just eating them naked. And all of a sudden that terroir, the French theory of, everything that helps into that seed, to the vine, to the, the typography, everything that affects that grape all the way to you sipping it, what type of bottle they put it in, how dark the bottle is, the shape of the glass. It's all going to affect the flavor. And I was like, I wonder if oysters are affected this way. Like we have a lot of pluff mud around here. When the tide's out, it can smell very pungent, like rotten eggs, in the pluff mud in the marsh area. But to me, that smells like home. But that would have a lot of flavor that would be going into the oysters. And I'm sure like up in Maryland or Massachusetts or up in Canada, they had different soils, different rock topography, and different minerals feeding into them. So I really started looking at that and found out that I wasn't the only one looking at this, and a lot of others believed in Miroir, which instead of terre being Latin for land, mer would be, the French derivative of sea, so terre, the Miroir would really describe why the oysters change, even if you take the same species and you grow it in different locations, it's going to change the flavor profile. Like if I brought Kumamoto's from the Pacific, and I believe Kumamoto is a Japanese strain, if I brought that here to South Carolina and grew it, it'd probably have a lot of similarities to the Kumamoto's over there, but I could see it as having a lot higher salinity and maybe a little bit of muskiness added into the cucumber flavors you get with it, just from our fluff mud and topography here. So I think that's the most interesting and fun thing to always be looking at oysters about for me.
You've tried a lot of different types of oysters. Do you have a favorite, or is your bias like, hometown oysters?
I think we're all biased to our native oyster. It's what we fell in love with first, and it will always be mom's cooking to us. No one beats mom's cooking. But when I look outside of South Carolina, I fall very much for the La Maison Beau Soleil. Most people just know it as the Beau Soleil. It's the perfect little cocktail oyster. It's got a wonderful size. The uniformity to it is just unbelievable. And they box them up and ship them very nicely. Tell the people growing them that take a lot of care and effort to present their oysters. When I bite into it, it's kind of crisp at first, but the meat opens up really nice and silky. And I get these wonderful kind of smoky oak flavors at the end, which if I was pairing, I would love to do that with like a multi scotch or something. I'm sure that would be a wonderful pairing. So the Beau Soleil would be my favorite outside of my home native oyster.
When you're let's say you're pairing with scotch, do you eat the oyster first or do you drink first?
I always do my oyster first. Now, when I'm doing pairings or tastings, I never go over, let's say, 6 oysters. I don't want to 6 different types of oysters. I don't want to overload my palate and what I'm able to comprehend. So I'll do like 6 or 4, but I always get 2 oysters of that variety. And I hear a lot of people say do the first one naked, just suck it all straight back, and you'll be able to see the oyster that way. For me, I always take the first oyster naked, and I take my fork and I fork the meat of that oyster out, and I start eating that. And then I kind of mentally note the different flavors of that meat. But mainly I'm trying to mentally note by taking the oyster out the salinity level. And it's funny because I then pick up the oyster and I'll drink the liquor, that little liquid in the shell. And there are times when the oyster will come off a little sweet, but that liquor is really salty. And had I done them both together, it would have probably come off as a high salinity oyster. But really, there's a lot more complexity there. And sometimes if it shocks me enough, I'll take the second oyster and I'll do it all together and see how that plays out. But typically, by doing the meat first and the liquor, I have a good idea of what the flavor profiles are working with there, so I can better pair my oysters. And like a lot of classic pairings, if we're going to go with like a Chardonnay-based champagne or Chablis or Sauvignon Blanc, and I see a lot of people do that at my restaurant. Big Shucker was talking about how he was a big beer person, and you know, you can do some heavier oysters with some lovely oyster stouts that these craft breweries are doing. But for me, I'm very much of a spirits person, and I always pair with gin or scotch. Scotch is a lovely pairing for me. Depending on where you are in Scotland, you can get real smokiness, which I feel like would go wonderful with the European flat, like the Ballon, which has a very high salinity. It's got some cucumber flavor to it, some flint, heavy copper. And then if I'm getting in a scotch that's on the islands or spray side up near the coast, that scotch is going to have a little hint of salinity to it. So that works very well for oysters for me. And then, you know, the gin, the aromatics that they put in the juniper berries and other aromatics that they use, I think would work wonderfully with like Pacific varieties like Kumamoto. So it's all kind of whatever spirits you like. You can always find wonderful pairings with oysters if you kind of think outside the box and open your mind a little bit. But yeah, no, I definitely prefer scotch with my oysters.
You just broke that way down. I'm trying to go get me a bottle of scotch now and a couple dozen of oysters. Wow.
Yeah, you can have some wonderful pairings with that.
Okay, so we got your favorite oyster to eat. What's your favorite oyster to shuck? Or would that be your Carolina?
The Carolina, I think I have a little bit more insight into it. It almost has this, on the hinge, this false hinge. The hinge comes out real far out of the back, and so a lot of people put their knife right in the beginning, and then they shut, and they just break the back part off, but it was kind of like a false hinge there, and you have to go in much deeper so you can get the oyster really sitting on that hinge, the knife in there. You're not poking through. You hold up the knife, and it looks like a lollipop with the oyster sitting at the end. Then you firmly but lightly, like you would hold a bird, grab your oyster, and then you just turn like a key, and it pops right open. But you can't just take the top shell off super fast because it's so long and thin. If you aren't careful, you're going to break the top shell down by where the abductor muscle is, because the top shell is so long, it becomes weak right there. So you have to glide your knife very carefully down the top side until you get to that abductor muscle and cut through it before you can try to remove the top shell. So it is something I am more skilled at than I think a lot of people are getting into, but it wouldn't be my favorite oyster. The Beausoleil is great, you know, for its consistency and size, but I honestly have the most fun shucking like a Wellfleet oyster or something out of tape, and trying to go do a side shuck, like right at the abductor muscle. I got the hinge facing me, bill looking away, cup down in my left hand, and I put the knife in just in front of the abductor muscle and go right in between the shells, and then bring the blade, razor sharp blade, straight back towards me, cutting the top muscle and bringing off the top shell at the same time, and then I just kind of switch sideways and cut the meat. That's the most fun to shuck for me. I just enjoy. It's a new skill I'm working on, and so I think that's why it's my favorite way to shuck.
If those words don't paint a picture in your head, then you need to listen to more Oyster Ninja. You just gave a great breakdown on how to shuck an oyster two ways. What's your experience with the oyster shucking competitions?
Yeah, so I always go in day one. Luckily, I've never missed a final. Typically, at these competitions, you start off with 20 or 30, 40 competitors trying to get into the final. And I always go in with the mindset that I'm going to hen shuck because that's what I'm most proficient at, and it's where I got my most speed. And then I have done this a couple times through getting up there on the stage and shucking the oysters that we're working with. I might go into the final and change up my approach completely and how I'm doing. In well fleets, I was this year I took the fourth there. Saturday, I did not shuck well. I came in ninth, but luckily they took the top 10 to the final. And I was like, if I don't really change this up, I'm going to not do well. So I was paying attention to what the other people were doing. I was having problems with the brittleness of the oysters, which I hadn't experienced with well fleets before. I noticed a couple of these guys that had won it a few times going in on the side by the adductor muscle, and I was like, show me that. So I worked with that for about an hour, and then I went over to the stage, and I got up there on stage, and I shucked as best I could using this new technique I learned that morning. And I dropped my time by like 2 minutes, and up until the last two competitors get up on stage, I was looking like I was going to have a top three finish. And I was very proud of myself for being brave enough, to having the courage essentially to change up my style and to try something new. But they both beat me, and I fell from second to fourth place, and they ended up competing as the top three shuckers for the grand prize. And then I did the same thing at nationals. I was struggling this year to get into the hinge. I was using my New Haven blade. It's got a little curve at the end. Kind of getting into that hinge and popping them. That was where my most time was. Went back and watched a video of me shucking, and so I switched to a Boston stabber. It's like a heavier Chesapeake stabber that I could go through the hinge with to help me get in there initially, and so I changed up the style completely, and I went from finishing third place going into the final to shucking, being the first to finish shucking at the national championship. Unfortunately, having changed up my knife, the blade was getting a little bit too far in there than I was thinking it was because it was a longer blade than what I was typically shucking with. And I was cutting a couple tops of oysters, and I ended up falling from first to second place overall from penalties. 3 seconds was the difference. But you know what? It's proven to me that I should never be afraid to try something new or to change something up as I'm seeing how the oysters are playing out that day.
What you just described is like, I think, struggles for every shucker because you know what you can do, almost perfectly blindfolded, and then for you to have to change it up all of a sudden, it's like, oh man, this is not going to be pretty, but it worked out for you, and I'm glad it did.
Yeah, I was really happy, and when you're up there in these competitions, you'll hear everyone talk about it. We all go in, we're all competitive. We come from different backgrounds, like big shuckers did sports. I did a lot of sports growing up. We have a drive, and when we're going in, we all want to be number one. We all want to beat everyone else there and come off the stage and be the champion, be the best shucker that day. But once it's all over with, and all that stress is gone or whatever you had to deal with going into the competition, you come off and give everyone a big hug, kiss. Your brothers and sisters in the shell. Which I think was a wonderful thing. Big Shucker said it's quite the family. We support each other as much as we want to be the one to go represent the United States in international competition.
Yeah, I think that's what I love the most about shucking is the family that we pick up along the way. It's like we don't see each other every day or even once a month sometimes, but once we come together at the competition, it's like a family reunion.
Yeah, the competition for us is celebrating what we all love to do and our passion. And seeing family. It's a homecoming. That's what it is. Wonderful.
So, what's the difference between this year's competition and last year's competition for you?
So, kind of going back and to probably what some people picked up along the way here. Last year I competed as a male. I finished 7th there. It's actually when I met you and met George Hastings Jr., shooter. I could have sworn I beat both y'all and got the top 6 finish to the final. But y'all skated by me by just a few seconds. Yeah, that was a hard one to take, but I got some wonderful friends out of it. Yeah, so I competed last year as the gentleman, and didn't really know, it was one of my first competitions, how the community would accept me. But ultimately I found a lot of friends there, a lot of, like we've been saying, family and acceptance. And when I reached out to the nationals this year, and I asked them if I would be allowed to shuck as a female, they were more than accepting and couldn't wait to have me back. So this year I shucked in the women's division, which was wonderful to me to probably be the first transgender person to ever compete on the national stage at the shucking competition, and to have all the love and acceptance when I came off, it really made me want to cry just being up there and experiencing all that. So it was a little different, but it was a wonderful experience for me to be able to be my true and genuine self.
So do you consider yourself a trendsetter? Like you're taking big steps, not just for yourself, but for, other people.
At first I think when I started 3 years ago when I started transition, and I think I just wanted to fly under the radar, working at the raw bar. No one cared what the person looked like back there as long as the oysters were beautiful at the end of the day. And as we know, oysters change their sex as well. So I was kind of just another oyster in a sense. I was family to the oysters. I just try to keep my head down, be low key, hear about all the people out there that aren't willing to accept or get to know you, and then slowly I just kind of grew out of my shell, and I found as I was more open, I wouldn't flaunt it in people's face. I wouldn't throw it out there. I would just meet people on common ground and get to know them, and ultimately I found acceptance and love, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm going to areas that maybe other transgender people aren't going into, or people in the LGBT community. And I am kind of a trendsetter. I am the first. And so essentially I'm like an ambassador carrying a flag. And that doesn't go past me anytime I go out and I'm in front of these new competitions and new crowds. I always remember that. Because the last thing I'd want to do is hurt someone down the road coming up behind me. I would like to, while I'm going forward, just leave a good taste in people's mouths, and just, I don't know, hopefully open a few people up. So, yes, I guess I am a trendsetter these days.
That's great, man. It's an awesome story. You shared another story with me about Miss Deborah Pratt. Do you mind sharing it with the listeners?
Oh, yeah. Deborah Pratt, the Black Pearl, absolute legend. If you don't know her, you need to get her. She's a world champion. She's won the U.S. Women's several times. She's the mainstay in Urbana Oyster Fest, which is a Virginia State Shucking Championship. Met her at nationals. Saw so many of my idols up there the first time. But then again, I bumped into her in New Orleans back in, I believe, June at the New Orleans Shucking Championship. She was down, and I didn't know really anyone there, and she was there representing Virginia, and I was representing South Carolina as state champion, and I walked up to her, and I kind of mimicked myself after her with all the pearls and everything, and I went up there and talked to her, and I said, I really hope it's going to be okay with you that I'm planning on competing this year, as my true identity and gender, and with the females. And she just gave me a big hug and a smile, and said she was more than willing to accept me in with the ladies and that she had my back, and I had nothing to worry about, that she would be there. Just fell in love with her very much after that, and hopefully maintained a close relationship. Even though I beat her this year in Urbana to win the Virginia State Shucking Championship, but she is still definitely a legend and something I hope to aspire to be someday. So, yeah, so Deborah's been a great support for me, and my hat's definitely off to her. I'm glad I met her.
No doubt. So, in the bigger picture, what's your goal for this oyster world? Or your oyster world, rather?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do this to get rich, for sure. This is definitely a passion, and unfortunately there aren't very many passions for people that really make a lot of money on. And I'm fine with that. But I want to definitely leave a legacy, much more than just the trans legacy. I want to help change the way people perceive shuckers as a whole. How people perceive oyster restoration and oysters in general. So I'm constantly working on trying to promote that. I'm looking at doing a book, develop my own oyster knife. Right now I'm working on a class to hopefully get that approved by Culinary Institute, so I can start certifying people in the path to being a master shucker from level 1, 2, 3 to a master shucker with classes and being able to meet certain skill sets, have certain knowledge. That's something that's really passionate to me, to leave that legacy behind so people can view us. We have a lot of skills, a lot of knowledge, like a sommelier, like these wine experts. Instead of kind of getting pushed off to the side, and you used to put your dishwasher as the lowest man on the totem pole and, on the raw bar, but now you're seeing a lot of skill, a lot of talent, a lot of knowledge out there, and I think this will help propel us all much further. And so that's really what I'm working on and want to leave behind, is kind of a certification for shuckers to meet different qualifications to obtain a title.
Great minds do think alike. I'm loving it. So do you have any competitions lined up for 2018?
Oh my God, do I? I think I am set for about 12 competitions right now.
Sheesh.
Yes. I got invited to the World Oyster Shucking Cup in China. I believe that'll be 8 days in 8 cities, shucking across China. Be my first time to Asia. Who would have thought shucking would take me across the world?
Right.
I got invited to Canada's second annual Fastest Women Shucking Competition that's held right next to their national championship. George Doodle of Green Gables Oysters up in Prince Edward Island. Him and his wife have been oyster farmers, shellfish farmers for years and years, and unfortunately she passed from cancer, and he believed it was always her goal to see women come up in the industry in fisheries and shellfish and shucking. So in her memory, he started last year Fastest Women in Shucking Canada competition at the Nationals. I put the money up for it, and there's a plaque, and it's got kind of a character, a pirate version of his wife on there. But yeah, he's doing a lot, him and his family, to help promote women in shucking. So I'm very excited to be a part of that. That's going to be huge. I'm not missing that trip or the China trip. Then I'll go back to Wild Fleet, New Orleans, back to Virginia, here in South Carolina, and the Nationals. I got to defend my titles there in those competitions. And then this year I'm also looking at going to Colorado and going to Connecticut for Melford, I believe, is the competition up there. So yeah, I got quite a full plate of competitions that I'm looking forward to getting involved in.
Wow. I feel like I'm slacking now.
You're doing a lot of wonderful things yourself. This podcast, I've been listening to it. It's absolutely wonderful. It's helping grow that knowledge and spread what we do to the people, which it's wonderful. Nothing to worry about there.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think we can wrap it up. Is there any last notes you want to leave for our listeners, the good people? Great story. I love it.
No, yes. I guess for the people out there, I'd say, get to know your oyster shuckers at your local raw bar. Be shocked at, the diverse backgrounds and knowledge and how interesting these guys are, and let them try to show you a path through oysters, and remember to always put the shells back and support the oyster recovery program. I think that would go a long way to growing the general knowledge of what we do, and that's what I would like people to kind of remember. So.
And where can my oyster ninjas in training find you?
Yes. I have a website coming out very shortly. It will be the holycityoystermaven.com. You can also find me at Holy City Oyster Maven on Instagram. On Facebook, I'm starting a page there as well. But that really won't get going until the website's finished and they'll be paired up. And then obviously, just always look out for me in the ranks, in the list at the competitions. I'm always excited to meet new people and to talk, about my passion.
Well, I just want to say you're killing the game. I love the move that you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Gardner. And remember, peace, love, and shuck on, all right?
Peace, love, and shuck on. I couldn't have said it better myself. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode where I interviewed Miss Isabella. Like I said, thank you guys for sticking with me. Thank you for all your shares, your likes, your emails and questions. Thank you for all of that. If you have any emails, email me at oysterninjapc@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram at oysterninjapc. Facebook, the Oyster Ninja Podcast. And let's talk a little bit about Facebook. I got in a little heated debate, I guess you can say. And this might lead to another episode down the road. But if there are any vegan listeners, send me an email. Let me know what's your opinion about eating oysters. I mean, I guess you're listening, so you must be or might be eating oysters. Or maybe you're listening to find out, are vegans oyster friendly? Or are oysters vegan friendly? Because I don't know. It's they didn't joke around when I was talking about oysters, but I always thought that oysters were vegan friendly because of the no central nervous system. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've led some people down the wrong road because of my false information. But like I said, it may lead to another episode. I hope you enjoyed this one. Keep sticking with me. It's only going to get better. Got some plans I'm working on, some field trips. But check out on Instagram my DC story. She just did a nice video on me. I'm teaching you how to shuck oysters. So if you ever wanted to learn how to shuck oysters, you can follow me on Instagram. I got it on SS Shucking page. It's on my DC story, and it'll be on Oyster Ninja Podcast by the time you get this. Be safe. Start the year off right. Eat some oysters. Thank you.